Introduce Michele Massa, who's one of our fellows. You've been around, you know him a little bit, but he'll show you a little bit about his work in Anatolia and some of the story and the findings of early urban systems and how they changed, but also how they first appear and were put together, and the kind of evidence that we have on these systems as well and how we can use them. I just want to say that beyond even this work that we're very excited about is also a collaboration with the Oriental Institute, who you may know has been one of the pioneers in studying, of course, some of the first cities in the world, but also in comparative studies between the cities, particularly of the Middle East and Mesoamerican places, by which, of course, we have sort of an incredible kind of insight that is not possible by other disciplines in terms of comparing forms of urbanism that must have occurred. So these studies that kind of allow us sort of deep studies about the nature and the essence of urbanism in very different contexts. And they're really valuable, besides being, of course, a reason for pride to get questions. So without much further ado, Michele, thank you. And please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. So today I will be presenting part of my project here at Mansueto, which is really about understanding the impact of early cities on the social and natural landscape that surround them. And sort of also to make it easier for a non-archaeological audience, I tried to simplify a lot of concepts. I hope I managed, and forgive me if there is going to be a lot of data and dates. But in order to make it easier, I thought that comparing the work that I'm doing with the research on urban hinterlands, modern urban hinterlands, might be fruitful for the wider discussion in urban studies. And so what I mean by hinterland is actually spaces that are in contrast with and by necessity produced by cities. So urban hinterlands cannot exist without cities, in the sense that they are as much as cities begin to be built up, the more the city are growing, the more the hinterlands are also growing. And Neil Brenner, which is also an urban scientist here at Chicago, described an extractive landscape. So places where they cater for the needs of the city in terms of raw materials, primary resources, and that often bear the brunt of the environmental impact of cities on the landscape. And in a seminal work in the 1970s, Lefebvre sort of placed the beginning of urban hinterlands around the 17th century, between the end of the Renaissance period and the industrial age in Europe, marking this moment as the moment where there is a shift in how wealth is accumulated from sort of agrarian wealth to an industrial wealth. And so what I'm also trying to suggest today is that this might actually be brought back a lot further into the Bronze Age, let's say at least 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And so what I would like to show you today, hopefully simply, is that in parallel with the development of complex societies and with urban centers and the early states and early empires, I would like to show how the landscape around them is also structured in a political sense, looking, for example, at settlement hierarchies, or attempt at controlling large swathes of territory, but also warfare, and how the landscape around cities is also economically structured in terms of land ownership and land use, and also how transport networks ease the redistribution of resources to the city. And lastly, also the sort of large-scale projects of landscape engineering and resource extraction. So why I think that archaeology might be important for urban studies is that it presents case studies that are much simpler in a sense, even if we know less than modern studies, but they present a lower systemic complexity, and they are easier to model in a sense. And also they provide a long diachronic sort of span of time that allows to see the growth and the development of different mechanisms and processes. And particularly why Anatolia, I think, and Anatolian cities are important is because Anatolia is actually ancient Turkey. And as part of the Near East, I think that Near Eastern cities are really the template and the origin of what are today's Western global cities. So I think that there is a lot there that can be unpacked. And archaeology has a largely untapped potential in this sense, I think. So just to set the stage where we are, when we are, and very basic concept of what is a city in archaeological terms. And I think that, of course, there is a lot of research and there is a lot of different traditions, but I think that most people would agree that a city is always analyzed in comparison with what it is around, right? It's not in a vacuum. It is a comparing with other settlements around. And there must be some form of concentration of power, both economic power and political power. And that means, for example, administration, military might, but also presence of markets and mechanism to control production and redistribution of resources. And also social stratification, so that, well, what probably today is banal, but the idea that people are not equal socially, so there are different statuses. And also an ideological apparatus that sort of allows to justify this inequality and the concentration of power in the hands of a small elite. And large population densities, and of course, this is compared to what is around. So you will see in a while, I mean, ancient cities, they tend to be very small in modern terms, like 10 to 20, 30,000 people. And also something else is that cities generate some form of art and science. And actually, the earliest forms of science, of astronomy, for example, are very old, maybe like 10,000 years old. Where we are, actually, we are in Turkey here. And this is a map of Turkey and modern rainfall patterns. And here, this red area is low precipitation. So this is a semi-arid region, and my study area is right here. So we will see in a while why it is important. And in terms of chronology, we are starting around 8,000 BC, so 10,000 years ago, when we first have the first sedentary agricultural communities. And then, we slowly but steadily go through different phases of complexity. So here we have the expansion, if you wish, of agricultural, agropastoral lifestyle in more marginal niches beyond the fertile areas. And around 3000 BC, we have the first centers that so we see a differentiation in community size. And then 4,000 years ago, we have the first cities and city-states. And then we have a little later, early territorial states. And then around 2,500 years ago, we start having large trans-regional empires. Not all the time, but most of the last 2,500 years, the Konya region, which is where my focus area is under imperial states. And so the Ottoman Empire, which is the last sort of political entity that we'll look at, is actually ends in the early 20th century. Say it again? Well, there is also, again, a lot of work on it. It was a bit wetter. It was like maybe 10% wetter in the early Holocene. So let's say 10,000 years ago was wetter than today, but not much better. So today is a steppe land, and at the time was maybe a savanna, but not much wetter than this. Sure.
Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by mature sedentary communities in early centers? And
sure.
To what extent these forms were coming and going? It looks a bit like a linear progression, but in the beginning, that's not true.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to simplify at the very most. I mean, mature sedentary community means that what we noticed, and maybe I can show a little bit later with maps, is that there is a point where, in the early agropastoral villages, let's say, there are sedentary communities, and around in the more marginal ecological niches, there are still hunter-gatherers or mobile communities that rely not on agriculture, but on hunting and gathering. And around 4000 BC, or maybe a little bit earlier, what we see is that there is an expansion of these agropastoral sedentary communities toward the highlands, toward more marginal lands, because of various factors, but including technological improvements in agricultural practices, for instance. And so between here and here, of course, there are moments of collapse and moments of expansion of these centralized and political entities. In some cases, we have I mean, there is a general progression toward more complex systems, but there is also pivots of collapse in between, of course. Is it okay? So what I am looking at actually is all these individual site settlements here in this area here. And I have two different data sets. One is within this area here where I lead an archaeological survey. And then there is an area where I have less control over the data, which is a lot more sites. So what I have tried to do is what I'm working with essentially is our survey data. I mean, not non-excavated sites. So I work with very little information. In fact, it's about the chronological phases of occupation, the size of a settlement, and possibly their function and their socio-economic and political function. So what I've done for this area here, where I have less information, is I try to use satellite imagery to understand a bit more in detail their size. And probably this first lecture that I participated when I was here at Mansueto was by Hannes Tauenbock, who is working at the German Aerospace Center, and he was doing some very interesting work on modern cities. And I thought, he was looking at how to detect automatically from satellite imagery urban sprawl. And so I thought that might be useful method also to identify archaeological settlements. So he put me in contact with some colleagues at the Aerospace German Center. And so what I have here is actually what the closest we have to LiDAR in this area of the world is a digital surface model, which is very accurate. And what you see here, all these little bumps, are actually archaeological sites. They're called tells. They are mounded settlements because they were built in the same spot for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And another project that I'm collaborating, this is a zoom in of one of those. Another project I'm collaborating with them is to use an instrument of the International Space Station to actually try to identify automatically the anthropoid, so the highly organic sediments that are created by human settlements, and therefore refine with this my information about site size. And the last data set that I have is actually for another project that I'm co-leading is Ottoman period tax register. So tax, like IRS tax register from 1584, which covered the whole of my study area. And they are incredibly detailed regarding, even the name of individual taxpayers and how many people there are in villages and what are the professions of people that pay the taxes, and also all the taxable activities that occur in the continent. And I will show a little bit of that. So the first sort of analytical segment that I would like to show you is this is a combined sort of view of all the settlements in the area divided by period, which are all these different colors, and the settlement size in different periods. So the box plot is sort of first and third quartile, and these are the outliers, and these are the maximum largest sites, which are so this is also the periods that I showed you before. And what you see is that the maximum size of sites increases from 10,000 years ago to present approximately, and that the sort of city size for this area is around, the minimum size is around 10,000 people.
It looks like the medium size is not changing very much.
Exactly, yes.
Most people are rural, but there are some large cities.
Correct. I will show that in a second as well. And secondary centers, they hover around 2,000 to 7,000 people, and they also remain fairly constant across most of the period that analyzed. And then when the first empires start to appear, the secondary center tend to disappear, to become smaller, and sort of the disparity between the size of the city and the size of all the other communities tends to widen. And so yes, as you were saying, the average village population remains fairly constant across the whole period, and in fact, it remains constant even today. So this is today 2020 census, and most villages today, they are the same size. So there is. Sorry, yeah. So I should have expressed here. So these two sites are actually well excavated. So I don't. You can see here. So when the arrow first city. So these two sites are excavated. So the parameters that I described earlier, they fit. So there is centralized administration. There is writing. There is. I mean, the 10,000 is specifically for this area. I mean, in northern Mesopotamia, they are much bigger as early cities. They're much bigger. In this,
there a threshold where once you get over 10,000, then you need administration, right?
I think so. Yes.
Like, is there like a certain size when you have a certain number of people, then you have to have like roads, and you have to therefore have something to think about the roads, rules, and then you need taxes.
I mean, it's not that simple because in different areas of the world, this threshold changes, right?
What is the range of that threshold? Is it 10,000? Is it
Yeah, I mean, it's also it's difficult because it depends on the concept that people apply to what is urban. In my opinion, that like 5 to 10,000 is the bare minimum, but then it can go up. I think Ur and Uruk, there are like 200,000 people at the same time.
Sure, but what's the biggest size that's disorganized?
Well, I mean, depends on what you mean by organization. I don't think that there is anything disorganized after 3 people, right? I mean, you need to have some form of hierarchy if you're more than 2 people. But that hierarchy increases the more people there are. Yes, it's a continuum.
There's a lot of discussion exactly on that theme, and the tendency in recent years has been exactly to size those thresholds. There are many settlements that look quite big in this range of tens of thousands of people. Some of them may be contemporary, we don't know, all the way from the Americans to Cahokia type things. And those are crazy places also in Eastern Europe, well looking at. So there are many sites like this that we don't understand very well, for permanent sites and the trappings of what we think later is.
Yes, so the point that I was making earlier about what I define as urban is, so here is where most of those parameters, they fit my personal understanding of urban for this context, which doesn't necessarily mean other contexts. And I think that what we're used to today is that cities, they look similar, even in wildly different contexts, while in the past, they were totally different structures altogether. So as Luis was saying, in Mesoamerica, there are maybe places that have 200,000 people, and I personally wouldn't consider them a city. They are something else. No.
I want to know why they're not cities, but maybe I don't like it.
Because they're very low density, so they're not. They are connected neighborhoods. Yeah, it is a low density sprawl, which is loosely connected, and it doesn't have necessarily a central place. It doesn't have a central administration. Doesn't have a sort of defined boundary, and doesn't necessarily have a unified sort of political structure.
How do you get population numbers for these sites? So some you said were excavated. Is it house?
Yes, I mean so there is again a lot of discussion about how to calculate site size, population size. So this is simply what is the mean estimate for population size in mounded settlements in this area in this period. So it's 150 to 200 people per hectare. So I know how many hectares there are. And actually the original slide was in hectares, and I thought, nobody will understand what I mean. So I tried to convert. So as you can see, there is a lot of possible different interpretation for the same data, which makes sense, but I don't have the time, sorry, to explain all of the details. Otherwise, I cannot go anywhere.
Are some cities that are in certain hotspots? So in other words,
yes. So there are some settlements that they continue across long periods of time, maybe 1,000 years, 2,000 years. Okay. So actually, just to give you a sense of how small these ancient cities are, so this is a plot of the population of Konya, which is the main city in my study area. And it is one of the oldest cities in the world. It's like continuously more than 5,000 years of settlement. And so all of this is until the 20th century. And you see that it's relatively constant. It's around 15 to 30,000 people. And then it skyrockets when industrialization takes place in Turkey, and now is over 100 times bigger than it was a century and a half ago. At the same time, rural population didn't grow almost at all. So in a sense, what we see is that both village size and rural population remain fairly constant across time. And of course, there is improvements in mechanized agriculture and other factors, but it stays more or less the same. And what really skyrockets is the urban population. So now, just to give you a very brief outline of how does it look like on a map. So this is the Konya Plain, and this is a river, and it does not have any outlet in the sea. It just creates a delta in the middle of the plain. And because it's a semi-arid area, what you will see is that most sites until the Roman period, until 2,000 years ago, they mostly are within the wetter area. So this is the early farming communities, and this is Çatalhöyük, one of the most famous early agricultural sites in the world. And you see that they are all fairly small and fairly undifferentiated. And so this is when we start have an expansion from this early nucleus into more marginal areas. And this is where we start seeing some bigger sites forming between like 5,000 and 10,000. And here around 3000 BC, this is when we start seeing all sorts of different small centers appearing, and they are all contemporary, and they are all quite big, and they probably have a very little territory around them. And actually, this is the phase of all the periods where we see the most conflict. There is a lot of warfare, there is a lot of settlement destructions, and it's all almost contemporary within 200-300 years. We have quite good radiocarbon data about this space specifically. And so there is a lot of competition for territorial control probably in this phase. So this is the first moment where we see political struggle, if you wish, between 3000 and 2000 BC. And then this is the earliest city that we have, which is Konya. At the time was called Ikuwania. And we see there is writing, so we see that we know that it is a city-state, and there is some territory around that it controls, but probably it was in conflict with other similar entities around it. And this, it shifts, the main city always shifts between Konya and Turkmenkere. Turkmenkere remains for 1,000 years, remain the major center, but then it goes back to Konya. And so this is, you can see that the number of secondary centers start to thin out. And in this phase, we see that they are very widely spaced. And this is the moment where we have the first, this area is conquered by the Persians and becomes part of a vast empire stretching from Iran all the way to the Aegean. And this is also the moment where we see the first time these settlements going out of the river delta, because there is probably an irrigation system that is being created by the Persians. And in contemporary with this evidence for conflict and for territoriality, what we see is also in the highlands, a large number of fortifications, fortified sites on hilltops. And they look, this is one example, for example. And they start around 2500, and they are basically in place until the Ottoman Empire, when it is at the center of the empire and all these fortifications are no longer needed. And this string of fortification surrounds the whole of the Konya plain. So there is a clear attempt to control access in and from the area, not only for military reason, but also to collect taxes. So these were on major thoroughfares, and we know from texts that even in 4,000 years ago, they were collecting tolls at bridges and mountain passes and this sort of things. And as I said, there is also quite a large amount of evidence for warfare, and this is also from slightly later. We have textual evidence for wars in these years, and you can see they are very frequent. And so between the 2500 and 1500 is where the most of is the most violent period. Is before territorial states start to settle, and so when this area becomes part of a center of a kingdom, of a state, it sort of quiets down, if you wish. And
a reflection of the level of conflict in sort of pre-urban society that just doesn't leave archaeological evidence. When like nomadic bands are fighting with each other, you don't have any record, right? I'm just thinking of the North American population, had a fair amount of conflict, but it wouldn't have left a record.
It would, because, for example, you analyze skeletons and you can see that people have been killed violently, for example.
So you're saying it is a change?
There is.
It's not normal. It's some sort of...
Yes, absolutely. There is an increase. Of course, there were homicidal even before Homo sapiens, but there is definitely increase in violence in this period.
So the guy who killed the Iceman, that's earlier, right?
That's 3000 BC, 3200, yes.
So that was the violent episode also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in terms of how the landscape is transformed around the cities, we already have very good evidence from faunal and floral remains in excavations that there is a gradual but steady expansion of agricultural lands already after the first sedentary communities are settled. And then actually deforestation is one of the earliest human-driven factors of degradation visible in this area. And much later, there is also a start of horticulture. So you have a lot of domesticated trees competing with the woodland, but also I was saying before that improved agricultural techniques allow eventually to colonize also the highlands and the uplands by agropastoral communities. So there is a slow but definite landscape colonization in time.
Can I ask you super quick? I know I'm taking your time. For expansion of agricultural land, there's like 3 factors that could drive that. It could be that people are increasingly being agricultural, and it's the same person would be like pastoral for part of the time and also agricultural. So more land per person. It could just be more people, or it could be that there are pastoralists and there are agriculturalists, and the fraction of agriculturalists is growing. All of
the 3. Okay. Yes, okay. Definitely. There is a definite increase in population anyway. And there is a gradual settling of nomadic people. And yes. And then what we see already mid-3rd millennium is that they start irrigimenting the river. That means probably small-scale irrigation, and this is visible geologically, but also, as I was showing before, during the Persian conquest, we see an expansion of settled communities into the steppe, which is signaling probably a large-scale irrigation system, which is something that the Persians do in other areas of the Near East. And also, we have very good evidence for dam construction more than 3,000 years ago. And this actually is quite same size as small dams in the same area today. And mining after 3000 BC also becomes a major factor of pollution and deforestation in the area. And what is really interesting is that many of these processes, they seem to appear broadly in tandem. And with the first centers, there is also what we call a transport revolution. So around the late 4th millennium, there is the invention of the wheel, and then the spread of several domesticated pack animals that allow to increase the speed and the cargo capability of transportation. And therefore, while before exchange was based on how much you could carry on your backpack, now you can carry endless amounts of resources. And so also this helps the early city-states and then states to expand and to provide sort of a network for the administration and the military as well. And because wheel and hooves, they make more permanent signs on the terrain, this is also the moment where we see the formalization of roads. And this is probably the oldest known set of roads in the world, around 2500 BC in northern Syria. And this is captured by satellite imagery and by sort of the traces left in the terrain. So you can reconstruct this. And so just to give you an example, so this is 5 kilometers. So this is very dense road network, which would have helped to create a sort of city hinterland. And this is one of the biggest sites in the area as well.
Is the thicker lines water, or is that the road there?
Sorry, the blue lines are water, yes. So the small lines are roads, and the dots are individual settlements.
And this is suggestive of what the roads are used for, right? Like in terms of agriculture.
Correct. So most of the roads are actually just going to the fields, just 2-3 kilometers into the fields, while some roads, they connect settlements. So this road connects all the settlements all the way. But yes.
That's a super quick question about the wheel and the horse.
Sure.
Do they know, did one come before the other, or is it more or less simultaneous?
I mean, the wheel came earlier, but first. So then? So human power wheels first, and then. Well, I think that, I mean, they already had domesticated the ox, the cattle a lot earlier. So any animal, the wheel first is domesticated animal. Was there human power wheels, or did they always go with animal? Probably always with animal. So just moving quickly, I don't know how much time I have left. 2 minutes. Yeah, perfect. Well, I can just go around. All right, so very quickly, we have evidence for land ownership and cadastral systems and field systems already in the Hittite period, but more from the last 2,000 years, it's very clear. We have, because of the way they were collecting taxes through, they were collecting taxes in kind. So there is a start of cereal monoculture. So they were collecting wheat as tax. So we see the spread of just wheat and barley all across Anatolia. And then we have actually a shift from what was the typical village, prehistoric village, what I was describing for as a mounded settlement, into much more dispersed and loosely connected hamlets, which is probably a socio-economic shift in terms of the function of the settlement. And they were probably, these hamlets were specialized in agricultural production and catering, again, to the cities. And then the concentration of specialized craft into cities. I thought that there was a lot more. All right, good. So I hope that it was clear enough, even if there was a lot of data and a lot of things that I couldn't really properly express in such a short time, but that together with an increasing political complexity and an ability really to control large swathes of land, what we see is also large strategies to restructure the landscape around the cities, both to help with the resource extraction and with redistribution of these resources across the state, across the empire. And also that this sort of non-urban rural communities, if you wish, they also experience important socioeconomic changes that include also the shift of skilled labor toward the cities. So increasingly more after the Roman period, for instance, all of the specialists go to, are located in cities. And so the rural communities are essentially specialized in agriculture, which was not the case in prehistoric periods. And so all of this is of course, that there are parallel processes. They're not necessarily all flowing into each other, but there is a convergence of many of these processes already with the appearance of the first imperial entities around 2500 BC, and definitely with the Roman Empire, let's say 2000 years ago. And so how does this compare with the modern urban hinterlands? I think that definitely there is a difference in scale. So there are the modern cities are several factors of magnitude bigger than ancient cities, and therefore, by necessity, even the hinterlands are much more structured, much more sophisticated than ancient ones. But I think it's more a matter of scale than quality, and I think that this is what I try to show is the origin of this process. And thank you.
I think back to your definition at the beginning of what an hinterland is. You had that phrase from Mumford, I think, about unbuilding. What's
yes.
Unbuilding?
Yes. So it is. So it is contrasted with upbuilding. He uses upbuilding as the vertical building of cities. So like skyscrapers, but also generally above ground building. And unbuilding is that because those resources that are piled up in the cities that are just unbuilt. Yes. Yes. Sure.
I have a question about trade. So I know trade routes, even in the absence of cities, trade routes can be very long, but they're not moving a lot of volume, right? They're moving a few high value items.
Mm-hmm.
Like in California, we see stuff coming from Northern California, Oregon, to Central California. But once you get domestic animals in your cities, now you can have bigger sort of mass flux of goods. And so I'm wondering if that's ever something that's tracked in those units to say, like, what is the mass flux in trade, not just so this is what we use in physical science, the kilograms of things moved around,
mm-hmm.
Per time, maybe with a distance unit in there also, It's not just that, so there's the length of the trade route, but you're moving like 2 pieces of obsidian and shells, right?
Yes.
So it's not like very much mass and used, versus now you can have these huge volumes
mm-hmm.
of food.
Yes. So let's say until maybe maritime and overland networks are different because over sea you can carry a lot more. Yeah. But anyway, overland networks until, let's say, the Roman period, I would say, they are mostly high value, low bulk. So precious, correct. With some, so the food can be moved around maybe 20, 30, 40 kilometers, 50, but not more than that. While metal can be transported over maybe 5,000 kilometers. But then with paved roads, with impressive infrastructure, I mean, Romans were able to transport immense amounts of grain, both through the sea, but also through land without any problem. Yes.
One more question.
I was just going to ask whether you would claim that the global invention of the wheel actually occurred in your study area?
No. No. I mean, it is difficult to pinpoint it, but possibly is Ukraine or Russia, southern Russia. That is where most studies would put it. Caucasus.
And in an urban context rather than a rural one?
Rural, probably. Yes. So apparently, one of the largest prehistoric migrations was sort of favored by the invention of the wheel, and they were pastoral communities actually, so that they were using carts just to move around rather than exchange stuff.
The wheel have only a single origin, or was it
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is the wheel was also invented independently in Mesoamerica, but.
Okay, good. That's what
Thank you. Thank you.